Police officers. What is your best, nope, not worth it, story? When I was on field training, just after the academy, I was in the last phase of field training, which is where they have a trainer ride with you, but we all pretend the trainer isn't there so they can see how you will be in your own. During this time, my trainer and I responded to a drowning call as a backup unit. Once we got there, it was determined that it was a child. As any police officer will tell you, in a case involving children always hits the hardest. I did a quick walk around the scene. It was a nice home. It had a pool and a hot tub out back, which was all fenced in. But because they had children there, the owners also put a fence around the back door to create another barrier between the back door and where the pool and hot tub were. I could tell immediately that the parents were trying to do the right thing and make the house as safe as possible for the little ones. The hot tub even had a protective covering on it, which acted as a secondary safety measure and should have supported the weight of the child with no problems. The child that drowned was just about 2 years old. At the house was an older sister of the child, mom, dad, and grandparent, all obviously in unfathomable grief. It showed. The ambulance was just in the process of loading the child to take her to the hospital. I was given a brief story as to what happened. Apparently, mom decided to take a nap with her sweet little daughter, and they both went to bed in mom's bed. The child woke up before mom and began to wander around. She was still more comfortable with crawling than walking, from what I was told, even though by this age she had learned to walk just fine. She wandered to the back door, which is cracked open. The child then goes to the gate surrounding the back door, which would normally prevent the child from getting into the pool area, but the last person to use the gate didn't let it latch all the way, so the child was able to go through the gate. The child then went up to the hot tub, and the hot tub cover was not properly secured all the way, so the child fell into the hot tub right outside of mom's room while she napped. The father was watching TV, and the sister was in her room listening to music. So sad. I was then tasked with going to the hospital where the child was being taken and standing by until detectives could get there. But before I could do that, I had to go tell the media where they could stage. Somehow they got the news of this and were starting to show up. After I did that, I went to the hospital with my trainer. Once we got there, the ambulance had already shown up, as had the immediate family, and they were in emergency room too. I was instructed that I had to go into the room and stand by until the detectives got there. When I walked into that room, I was not ready for what I encountered, and years later, I realized that even today I would still not be ready for it. When I walked in, the mom was holding on to the daughter. The body looked unreal. The skin was blotchy, but I could still see her hair in my mind. It looked normal. It was brown, somewhat curly like she had just woken up. It looked so unreal. Despite how she looked, her face appeared normal as she seemed peacefully asleep. And all I wished for was for her to just wake up, but she never did. Mom was crying and letting out noises that haunt me to this day. Also in the room were the father and the grandparents, all also crying uncontrollably. The mom was rocking back and forth, holding on to her daughter. I'm just standing there, trying not to be noticed as I realized that if I were in their shoes, I would want to be able to grieve without some police officer standing over my shoulder. I tried to be a fly in the wall for them. After several minutes, the nurses removed the entire family, and as mom was leaving, she laid the child gently back on the table and kissed her forehead goodbye. Now that I was stuck in the room with my trainer, we did not say a word. We remained in there as we were supposed to for about an hour until detectives arrived, while this child lay there. All I could do was stare at her, and her image was burned in my mind. We weren't allowed to cover her. When detectives got there, including a supervisor for that unit, they asked what happened when I got there. I explained to the supervisor what all happened when I got to the hospital. I was a little taken aback by what happened next. After I explained that I stood by to let the parents grieve, I was then yelled at and scolded for allowing the parents to handle the child as they did, meaning letting the mom and dad hold their child. It was explained to me that this case was still under investigation and that, until they could prove otherwise, they needed to make sure it wasn't a homicide and that it was in fact an accidental drowning. Allowing the parents to touch their child at all was contaminating the crime scene and possibly ruining any forensic evidence that might break the case. It wasn't a light scolding either, as I was still on-field training. My trainer just stood by and didn't say a word. I was told that I needed to secure this room and not allow anyone in it. That's the protocol. And if the parents tried to come in and didn't listen to me, I was to have the hospital staff make them stay back. If that didn't work, I was to arrest the parents for interfering. I could understand this if it was definitely a questionable case, but this wasn't. What the hell was going through my head after I heard this? Also going through my head was, if this was my child, it would take a lot more than some police to hold me back from seeing my child. They would have to arrest me to get me to leave that room, and even then, good luck with that. After we were relieved from that room, now that the sergeant was done scolding me, my trainer asked me a question. He asked, after being yelled at and learning how to handle this call, would you do it differently if you did it over again? I knew what he was getting at. Would I forcibly remove the parents from the room or let them grieve again, knowing what we both knew, that it was completely an accident for a nice family? And given that I could tell immediately that this was not an intentional drowning, my reply was, no way in hell. To which he replied, good, neither would I. It was then that I started to truly understand the meaning of officer discretion. I guess that was my nope part of this story, that if I ever get on a call similar to this, I will gladly say nope and let the family grieve. as long as it's obvious it was an accident and not a homicide. Sometimes it's better to be human than to follow protocol. I forgot to mention that this all happened on Easter Day. Ever since then, I hate when Easter comes around because I always get nightmares about a week out from Easter. I relived it that entire week. I wake up constantly night after night throughout the night sweating, and I see her face as if it were yesterday. And it makes me think that this girl will never get to celebrate any more Easters, nor will Easter be the same for that family ever again. It makes me think of my loved ones who are around this age. It eats at me. And this is years later. Every year it's the same thing over and over again. I hate Easter because of this, and it's sad because I used to love it. Story 2. I'm not a law enforcement officer, and for the sake of those who may have been involved, I forego defining the details of the evening. Late 80s. Someone I knew's parents had an importer's permit and a waiver of inspection for a special type of returning cargo transporter. Back then, for Euro-US deliveries, this was almost standard for non-standard containers. They procured dozens of cases of booze, real Czech or Yugoslavian ones, not the watered-down rubbish they have these days, but that was only part of the fuel for a mischief. 15 boats, each crammed with 3 to 5 people, landed on a deserted barrier island. Little more than sand, mud, and a ravenous mosquito army. Anyone who stumbled onto the beach that night got a red dot and a cryptic piece of paper. Our revelry began around 4 p.m., and on top of those dots and papers, we devoured 25-plus liters of booze. To shield ourselves from the mosquitoes and blur ourselves from the outside world, we slathered ourselves in mud. The first glimmer of the blue police boat's lights pierced the darkness miles away. We held our breath and waited. When the first DNR officer waded ashore, he found a handful of figures standing stock still, coated head to toe in nothing but mud. As he and his partner cautiously approached the fire, we rose, silent sentinels awaiting our fate. "If anyone else is here, reveal yourselves now," he barked. They did. From the muck emerged over 100 mud-encrusted figures whose pupils dilated to saucers under the firelight. Despite my hissed warnings to stay hidden, they rose like ghosts, a silent mud army. "Mkoso nache edisto. These are my brothers." The leader boomed. "This is our island, the island of our people. You trespass on our sacred ceremony." The officer, visibly flustered, stammered, "Do you have a permit for the fire?" "Permits from a white man? This is my land before the white man came along after you leave. You have no more authority over me than over the stars and the moon." By now, the full weight of the tribe had materialized from the shadows. Even amidst the swirling fog of intoxicants, I could sense the officer's realization dawning as the firelight illuminated the approaching mud-streaked crowd. He spun around, grabbed his bewildered partner, and scrambled back to their boat, vanishing into the night. Whether he feared paperwork, recognized some obscure indigenous rites, or simply felt out of his depth, he left us to a revelry. Now, maybe, just maybe, this whole escapade was a figment of a well-oiled mind. But over 50 people witnessed that surreal night, and to this day, I still wonder what the hell was going through that officer's head as he faced down a mud-caked tribe in a forgotten island under a canopy of stars. The best explanation I can muster, translated into modern vernacular, is simply, nope. Story 3. A call came across the radio for an accident where both parties were now fighting and getting confrontational with the officer who came to the scene. So my partner and I roll over, we get both parties separated, and it's obvious the one driver is DUI, so we hand her off to another officer to be arrested. And he proceeds to hand us the driver's passengers. 4 young girls and 1 full-on baby. I will never forget that sneaky bastard. So we arrange for another caretaker to come get these little muppets and bundle them into the back of our car. Well, you'll be shocked to learn that the children of mothers who drove under the influence are not the most well-behaved little angels. Plus, the baby has begun just wailing at the top of its lungs. So my partner takes the baby and a bottle he salvaged from the crash in an attempt to calm it. I'm in the driver's seat, trying to separate 4 screaming monsters through a partition. Also, I don't know any names, so it was a lot of, "Abigail? Is it Abigail? Stop pulling Sarah's hair. Zoe, don't touch that taser, it is not a toy." And so on. At about this time, our supervisor rolls by the scene. He pulls up next to the car and takes one look at the baby snuggled quietly in my partner's arm as he coos to it, then turns to me as I'm trying to separate 2 ponytailed badgers in iCarly shirts. I could physically see the note pass across his face, and he drove away without a word. I think we all got a taste of why she was hammered to begin with. Story 4. My trainee and I were called to a challenging situation. We arrived, and this distressed lady was expressing concern about her son, asking for assistance through tears. We entered the house, and the guy was lying peacefully in his bed with an empty prescription bottle beside him. The prescription was from 2 days ago, and with 50 pills all gone. Yes, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. The mom discovered him hours later, and by the time we arrived, things had already taken a difficult turn. While inspecting the scene and guiding my trainee with sensitivity, the mom insisted on staying close to her son, encouraging us to do whatever was necessary. One aspect of our job involves checking all deceased individuals for signs of trouble. At this point, my partner has joined us. I directed my trainee to assist my partner in turning the guy over to check for any other injuries or anything suspicious. Now Mom is standing beside the bed, my partner and my trainee are attempting to move him, and I'm standing by the foot of the bed. As we roll him, he lets out a fart. Loudly. Epic fart, really. Before I could say anything, I learned what farts from a deceased body smell like. Let me preface this by saying I have smelled horrible things in my career. Disgusting houses, gross people, and others. Nothing compares to the guy's fart. I gagged, very nearly threw up, and ran out of the house. I refused to go in, as every time I got near the door, I started gagging. The worst part was that I found it funny afterward, and the poor mom was just walking around covering her face with a tissue she was simultaneously trying to wipe her eyes with and breathe through. I noped that and made my partner and trainee handle the gassy guy. Story 5. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you were talking about, but it's by far my biggest nope. Years ago, before I went to patrol, I worked as a CO, corrections officer, at the local jail. It was common practice to search people going into the main jail. This one guy comes into the back. He's about 6'3" and weighs about 350 pounds. The procedure was to have them remove their underpants, turn around, face away from the officer, and squat and cuff. This would result in anything shoved up their backside to come out. There was this one story about a female in the projectile pill case that came out, but that's another story. This guy hands me his underpants, and I swear they felt like they weighed 5 pounds. If you have never seen fat guy tidy whities, they're quite large. Well, this specific pair was coated in crap. The guy did his squat and cough. He could have had a private jet in there for all I knew because I was in please do not barf mode. Normally, we give soiled clothes to the trustees to be washed. I told the guy that his undies needed to be thrown out. Nope, he insisted that I give them back. I gave them back to him, and he put them back on. Full-on gag reflex kicking in overdrive now. I just wanted him away from me. He put on his jail coveralls and went into the back. I still get shivers down my spine thinking about it. I've seen some horrid stuff in my job, but that one is the one that sticks with me. I wonder how many layers of skin came off washing his hands after. If you're having fun as much as I am, consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons so you never miss out on more of these hilarious stories. Story 6. In 2004, we had to arrest this guy who had ended his ex-wife, put her boyfriend in critical condition, and stole all of their money and anything he could sell. We couldn't find him for 2 days, but we had coaxed his friends and family to call us if he called him. Well, he called Grandma, and she told us he was at a McDonald's getting food. She said, "He sounded weird, like he was baked." So me, my partner at the time, and the head detective of the case all drove to this McDonald's. We found him at a corner table with a table full of burgers. This guy was big and black, but not a giant, unstoppable beast or anything. The second he saw our badges, he screamed at the top of his lungs, "I'm not going back to jail!" And then he literally rips the table that was bolted to the floor out of the ground. It was at this point that I was hit with a realization that this guy was on angel dust and had just turned into the Incredible Hulk. The lead detective dove at him and got thrown away. All I had was a stun gun, not a taser, so I had to get up close and zap him. I did. It didn't faze him. He wrestled with my partner and me for a bit. It was 3 versus 1 and he was winning. We called for backup, and just before 3 more uniforms showed up, he had been trying to pull my partner's firearm out of his holster. Luckily, he didn't know it had a thumb break. It took 6 well-trained police officers about 10 minutes to arrest this guy. In total, I sustained injuries. My partner experienced discomfort in 3 ribs, the lead detective injured his index finger after a fall, and one of the uniforms encountered a situation and contracted hepatitis C. The perpetrator had some bruises and a headache from what he took. Story 7. My partner and I made a stop in a car coming out of an area full of clubs and bars. My partner walked up to the driver's side and I walked up to the passenger side of the vehicle. The passenger of the car was passed out cold in the front seat. The partner asked to see the driver's license, insurance, and registration. The driver opened up the glove box, and that's when the passenger opened her mouth. She proceeded to get sick into the glove box and on her friend's arm. I turned around and walked about 10 feet away from the car. I hate vomit. I didn't hear the conversation or see the rest of the stuff in the car, but apparently it got ugly. That's what my partner told me. I could see the look of disgust in his face while he watched the passenger get sick all over the front part of the vehicle and on the driver as well. I saw the passenger car door open and the passenger fell and just lay there moaning. I yelled at my partner to tell the driver to get out of the car and take care of her friend. So while the driver was taking care of her friend, I got a little closer. The driver decided she needed to scoop some of the mess out of the passenger seat before she put the passenger back in the vehicle. I walked back towards the patrol vehicle and talked with my partner. He told me that the driver had a suspended driver's license and he thought she had been drinking as well, but he would actually have to investigate to see if she was buzzed. If we impounded the car or arrested the driver, we would have to take the passenger to the hospital for public intoxication. 2 girls in the back of a patrol vehicle covered in one person's spew? My partner and I both agreed, nope. We told the driver to get home, drive safely, obey every rule of the road, that she was lucky she wasn't getting the car impounded, that she wasn't going to jail. We drove away with lights and sirens and didn't look back. Story 8. I'm not a cop, but I shared a nope experience with an officer. So a few years ago, my teammates and I were heading home from a paintball tournament in Waukegan, Illinois. Waukegan isn't the safest of towns, but we felt comfortable enough to have the car windows down and enjoy the breeze after a long day. Traffic was heavy, so we were able to take in all the beauty that Waukegan had to offer. As our car begins to move on a green light, my eye catches something out of the ordinary in my peripheral. In the middle of a field near a strip mall, there was a brown electrical pole. This particular pole had the great misfortune of being covered in mess by a large, disheveled woman. A stream of something unpleasant was bouncing off the pole as if it had a target on it. She did not seem concerned, doing this in full view of a strip mall and hundreds of cars. I'm still silent at this point. I can possibly form a word. A teammate exclaims, "Is she doing that in a pole?" I'm staring in disbelief as a police car slowly rolls by in the opposite lane. The cop sees the woman, slows down for a moment, and stoically looks forward and presses his no pedal to get the heck out of there. "Thanks for the memories, Waukegan." Presses his no pedal. This is the term I shall use from now on for the accelerator. Story 9. There was a known, violent, mentally ill person named Chop in a neighborhood I worked in. As a rookie, I got a call of a prowler cutting through someone's yard near a cemetery. It's very dark and foggy. I pulled up to the area, spoke with a caller, and she described Chop. Chop was known to sleep in the cemetery and wander about at night. If left alone, he usually just went on his way. Well, being a rookie, I had to find this guy and see if he needed help or was a danger to the public, etc. I'm shining lights all around and I finally see Chop standing next to a fence with a hole in it, leading into the cemetery. Chop is huge, both in height and breadth. I called for an additional unit, only to be told the backup was a way off. I exit the car, staying close to it, and notice Chop has a 40-ounce bottle in one hand and a box cutter in the other. I think to myself, if he charges at me, I'll probably have to shoot him. I announce myself and Chop begins screaming, staring at me with a psychotic rage. He then makes a fist and shatters the bottle he was holding in his hand. He then proceeds to start muttering and go through the hole in the fence into the cemetery. I get back in the car and pulled back into service. Thanks for joining me in this bumpy ride through some crazy police business. If these stories made you laugh or your jaw dropped, dive into my other video. Emergency personnel. What is the dumbest dispatch call you've received? Story 3 deserves its own Netflix documentary. See you there.